Doubt. So thank you all very much for joining this particular session. I'm delighted to introduce a couple of representatives of our sponsors for the day. Mr. James Morrison, the distinguished technologist or a distinguished technologist at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and supporting James with the Q&A feature at the end of this session is Mr. Jesse Schrater, the Director of Data Center Security Marketing at Intel. So James is going to be leading us through a presentation today all around securing workflows with hardware innovation. So at this point, I'm going to hand proceedings over to James. James, if you want to take it away.
All right, sounds good. First of all, thank you all for being here. My name, as stated, James Morrison. I've been with HPE since December. Prior to that, I worked for the FBI for 22 years. So Scott Augenbaum and I are compatriots. We've been friends for quite a while, and so I'm sure that his presentation was one of those that will leave you very eye-opening. What was kind of interesting is my time with HPE is one of the roles that I have is to kind of help with cybersecurity and security messaging, and part of that is really built into the idea of workflow security and hardware innovation, and that's where when we've worked with our partnership with Intel to really develop what we believe to be a differentiated server, different than anything else you'll see in the marketplace. What's kind of interesting is that when I first started dealing with HPE here in the Houston area, probably 5 years ago, and they were already talking around the idea of hardware security. But one of the things that our CEO, Antonio Neri, had said was his vision of the enterprise of the future was edge-centric, cloud-enabled, and data-driven. What's interesting about that is because of the COVID pandemic, this is actually accelerated. Think about it. Whatever plans you had prior to the COVID pandemic went out the window as soon as you were in lockdown. Most companies were scrambling just to try to stay in business, to stay, continuing to have their workforces work from home and remotely. But the edge became a much more interesting place because now we had employees as part of that edge, not just things like IoT, not just things like mobile, and not just our customers. So the edge is becoming much more of the focus for every enterprise. And if we don't think that's true, let's just look at remote workforces. Prior to the COVID pandemic, we saw somewhere between 6 and 8% of the workforces working from home more than 50% of the time. Right now, that number is somewhere around 55%, and it's believed that it will settle somewhere between 45 and 60%. So that means we're going to have a lot more people working from home, and that means the edge is out there. And a lot of our cybersecurity products really aren't designed around the edge being our employees. So we have to have a lot more conversation around edge security. In addition, how do we use the cloud differently than we used it before? There's always been this conversation around public cloud or private cloud, and I think most of us have sort of agreed that it's going to settle somewhere into the hybrid cloud environment. But because of the work from home standpoint, the work from home mandates, cloud takes on a slightly different conversation. Can we use things like VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure? Can we use remote apps, app homing? I was talking to one company a while back, and they were a mortgage company, and believe it or not, we still had people buying and selling homes in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And so the mortgage company had never done a transformation where they had their data residing in a public space or a cloud-enabled space. So what they were doing is their employees had to come in every day and pick up the folder that they were working on and take it home. So I asked their security officer, I said, how secure is that data? And they're like, well, it's secure because I trust my employees. And I was like, that's not really the question. It's how secure is that data on that home network, on that home computer, especially if it was not a computer or a laptop that you provided. And it started to get kind of a conversation around, whether or not it really was secure, and then what steps could be taken to make it more secure. And so we were having that conversation around the idea of using a virtual desktop solution so that it didn't matter what computer they were using at home. They were able to deploy, into a cloud, a virtual desktop that is completely controlled by the data owner. But then the third conversation is how do we become more data-driven? Data is the focus. And what's kind of interesting is when I talk to companies sometimes, and I'll say, what data do you have that is so crucial to your business that without it, you would go out of business? And they kind of look at me sometimes and they're like, well, I don't know. I mean, we have customer data, we have maybe some intellectual property, but it's crucially important to make sure that we are controlling the data that we own and that we can develop. By 2025, there will be 175 zettabytes of data produced annually. Of that data, 70% of it is going to be produced outside of the data center. And 80% of that data produced outside of the data center will never be used. It means it's data being produced by sensors that maybe because of the way we have our rules set, that data is not forwarded on, or there's certain parts of the telemetry out of that IoT environment that really aren't necessarily, kind of useful to us. But if we can find better ways to use that data and unleash that power, we can create new revenue streams. This is a great example of when I was talking to one of the car manufacturers, and they were talking about automated cars. And they were saying that there is so much telemetry on every car that if they could take that telemetry and actually sell it to a third party, they could actually create a new revenue stream. So for an example, if they put a sensor on the tire, when that tire stops, they could actually measure the tread while the car is sitting in a stop position. They could then feed that real-time tire data to the tire manufacturer to help them develop different tires, or have a better idea of how those tires are being affected in different locales. There's also an idea of what if you could do a pothole detector on an automatic car, so that when a car hits a pothole, I can immediately take that data and then I sell that data to a municipality and help them locate that pothole faster and help restore those kind of things. So there's a lot of telemetry data, and I think we're going to have a lot more conversations around how do we use that data as we go forward, because digital transformation is going to be different. As I said before, whatever plans you had in place in January went out the window when you went into lockdown. So how do we start shifting focus from an ops environment into an apps environment? Things like containerization, things like, as we look at virtual machines and how we can actually, help these applications and data, run in a better way. Maybe it's an IoT environment, where we want to, we have old IoT devices that we want to be able to protect better, or at least make sure that should they get exploited, that data can't be used to exploit other locations. Taking that and putting it into containerization. So there's a lot of trends going forward, and we think that they're going to have a lot of great conversations. But with that, we need to have a better conversation around data security. So I will talk to a company, I'll say, okay, so how do you feel about your security? And they'll say, my network is secure. And I will sometimes, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, come back and say, but what about your data? And they kind of look at me quizzically, and they're like, well, what do you mean, what about my data? My network is secure. But because a lot of our security is network focused and not necessarily data focused, so that's a good question on the containers. So somebody asked a question, how do we secure containers or audit security on them? And I'll talk about some of those ideas as we go forward, but that's a good question. So how do we maintain security across all of the data flows? So when we think about data, and this is a conversation that we've had a lot with our Intel partners, is data really exists in 3 states. Data exists at rest. So when it's sitting just as a file on a file server, we've figured out encryption at that level. We know how to secure that. We have data in flow. We have data moving between different locations. That could be some sort of bulk type encryption or TLS, or even something like VPNs internal to a network. So data in motion, we've kind of tackled that. But one of the things that we never really tackled was data in memory. And so when you talk about containerization and how we can secure containerization, this is one of those questions. How do I make sure that this data that's in use, in memory, is not being exploited, not being used for malicious purposes? And that's why we need to become more data flow security centric. So that's, for me, I'm a systems guy. I've always said, how do I look at cybersecurity from a holistic approach? Because data is your currency. For every company, I don't care how big, how small, data really is the currency that can help your company jump forward into the next stage. But the problem with that is that the criminals have recognized that. They know, sometimes even better than the companies they're attacking, that their data is crucial. And if they can stop the functionality of your data or prevent you from accessing that data, they can force you to pay them a ransom or pay to prevent a data breach. So we have to start doing better about knowing how our data flows, how it should flow, and making sure security is built in under the data, not bolted over the top. Most modern security products are bolted on the top at the apps level, the VM level, maybe the OS level, but they're not doing a whole lot to make sure that data is protected in all of its states. So one conversation we have is across all of our products is protection. How does our product help you protect you against new vulnerabilities? Remote work has created all sorts of new vulnerabilities. There are people's home networks that are directly connected to your network through a VPN. Do you have the ability to sniff that traffic? Do you have the ability to see what their IoT sensors are doing at their home network and making sure that they're not doing something different than what they should be? What about detecting an intruder? How long is it going to take me to detect the intruder? Last year, Mandiant said it was somewhere around 75, 78 days to detect someone in your network. That's pretty good compared to how 5 years ago it was over 200 days, but it's still a long time. And that means when somebody gets in your network today, you would not detect them almost until the end of November, even into beginning of December at this point. That's too long. So we have to start finding better ways to detect. And then how do we recover? How do I recover from those attacks and do it quickly? Recovery right now from ransomware is somewhere between 30 and 35 days. That's a long time for your business to be inoperable, especially if that ransomware was able to get to a crucial part of your network. So detection and recovery, and these are things that we've built in across our entire portfolio. I also often get the question is, why is cybercrime the thing? And it really is just straight up money. Fully 80% of cybercrime is financially driven. Cyber criminals now are organized criminals. They're not kids living in basements. That whole idea has been gone for a long time. Most of them are really full-blown 24/7 syndicates operating out of countries that may even have the tacit approval of that country's government. That makes it very hard for the FBI to go out and arrest these people because often they are somewhat sheltered by the country they live in. And that's our challenge. But in addition, one of the things that's driven the rise of cybercrime has been the dark marketplaces. I can go out into the dark marketplaces and using things like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, I can purchase anything. I can purchase a ransomware attack. I can purchase a denial of service attack. I can even purchase, software or credentials into your network if they have those credentials. And so those dark marketplaces have become a very much of a focus of the FBI worldwide. But even the FBI recognizes that this is bigger than them. Last year, the FBI director got up in front of RSA and said, this is bigger than the FBI. This is bigger than any one government agency. And really, it's even bigger than our government. Cybercrime last year was $2 trillion industry, $2 trillion industry across the world. And it's estimated by next year, it'll be a $6 trillion industry. It's going to continue to rise. And we've seen this exponential rise. And we don't see that going away. But how do we balance that against the fact that our cybersecurity spending still remains relatively flat, or at least linear? So it's becoming crucially important to make sure that when any company is talking to another company about product, that we're first of all making sure we understand what your IT transformation really looks like. What are you trying to do? Because if I'm just pumping a product out to you and that product isn't really helping you achieve your IT transformation, then it's really not having any positive value. So what's kind of interesting about this is that 10 years ago, we were spending a lot of our IT security budgets on perimeter controls, firewalls, border routers, even hardened switches. Those are still necessary, but when we're looking at defense in depth, we start to recognize that there is much greater value when we start putting into our network things like user behavior analytics, machine learning, advanced identity and access control, things like zero trust, and security intelligence systems. And so we need to start having those kind of conversations about, from a cybersecurity standpoint, of what do you want it to look like? What do you have currently in place? And how can we help you get that proper product in to make you more secure, sometimes even if it's not an HPE product. So that's kind of one of our goals. But part of that is kind of interesting is that when we look at how much of our IT budget is really spent on security, and something that can be very well easily defined as security, that number hovers somewhere between 2.5 and 10%. So what if we were able to actually help some of those IT products, like servers, be part of that security product? And that's really the conversation we've had here at HPE and with our partners at Intel, is if I buy a product that has security built into it, but it's also part of my IT core, then now that the idea of IT budget and security budget being separate blurs. And that's what we have to get to. Every IT product we insert into our system needs to have security built into it. So that's our goal. That's what we want to help you with. And we need to start taking security out of the reactive realm and into a proactive realm. And so when we start talking about across all of our product lines, that's our goal. Now, this last bullet here is kind of important. We have seen an increase in potential of attacks going after BIOS and firmware. So where do we see that? Right now, the main attacks we see targeting firmware and hardware are in IoT and OT networks. We have seen a number of ransomware attacks and other hacks where they've attempted to jump the gap between the IoT or the IT and the IoT, and they've been successful. We've seen ransomware be deployed inside some of those IoT environments. We've seen ransomware actually be able to get to the MDM server inside of a corporate environment and deploy ransomware onto phones that are deployed through that MDM solution. So the criminal knows that if I can get into those networks, I can win that battle. There is the possibility that we had one of the largest IT OT hacks that we've ever seen, but there's not enough information. Honda Motors got hit, and in that attack, they shut down the production plants in 5 countries. Now, the question is did the actual attack jump that boundary? And we don't know. But it is possible, because later Honda did come back up online, and they haven't said a whole lot about the NetWalker ransomware attack. So this is a target. The criminals are understanding that they have to be able to get to your servers in order to get you to pay a ransom. So ransomware is becoming less likely to be deployed against endpoints and more likely to be deployed at servers, especially data servers and database servers. So that's what we have to start being more aware of. There was a pretty good Wall Street Journal report probably about 2 months ago talking about the industries that were most vulnerable. In this report, they kind of did asked some very interesting questions of these companies. And most companies view ransomware as a high risk, but of those that really viewed it as a high risk, only 70% of those felt like they were prepared to deal with it. So we've got to start recognizing that if we see something as a high risk, let's start asking that question of IT vendors of, what can you do to help me prevent a ransomware attack? What can you do to make sure that I don't suffer the ill effects? Cybersecurity programs. Only less than 2/3 of companies have one. That means that there's somewhere between 30 and 35% of companies out there that don't even have a cybersecurity program. They've attempted to roll cybersecurity under their IT mandate, but I've done that. I did IT for a long time, and as an IT manager, and when I was given the additional caveat of doing security, often security fell behind the daily operation of that network. So I think it's crucially important to start having a conversation about having a dedicated cybersecurity program, cybersecurity body. And then cyber insurance. It helps with preparedness. Executive level cybersecurity training, supply chain, and manufacturers, retailers, and government agencies are at high risk right now from these attacks. So one of the things we developed at HPE was this idea of this security reference architecture. So if you sat down with us and said, let's evaluate cybersecurity and your cybersecurity, we would come out with a model like this and say, okay, let's talk about things like your people. Are they trained? Let's talk about policy. Do you have cybersecurity policy in place? Let's talk about the products. What products do you have in place? Do you have an old operating system running? I've gone to companies that still run Windows XP. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And they're like, well, we just haven't gotten around to updating to something newer. But Windows XP is a huge security vulnerability because especially if these machines are internet facing, there's no security for them anymore. There's no updates. So even something as basic as that has to be part of that. Physical security. There's a rule out there from cybersecurity that says if I gain physical access to your server, I win, period. unless that server has some sort of data security protection built into it, that would prevent me from being able to access data from that server. I tell a story of a time when two people with a search warrant were able to gain front panel access to a server. And from that front panel access, they were able to cut a hole in the front panel and actually deploy probes inside of that server and tap those probes to different places on that motherboard and collect data that was traversing that motherboard. They did it without crashing the server. These things are what a hacker dreams of. And I have done it as an ethical hacker, and I know that it can be done if they get physical access. So when we talk about security reference architecture, physical security has to be part of that. So what three things are really impacting data center security? Because of this expanded edge, we have a huge expansion of the attack surface, right? And because so much of our data is being produced outside of the data center, how do we mandate that? So that expansion actually creates more of a interest in securing data at the data center, but also the data at the edge. And so we at HP have had more conversations about how do we get edge security? And we bought some companies here in the last year that are going to help us with that. Things like Silver Peak, things like SciTail, and some partnerships that we've built. The industrialization of hacking. Criminals are becoming more sophisticated. They know your data sometimes better than you do. And because of that, they can actually develop an attack surface based upon what they think would be the most important to you. And then the fragmentation of solutions. How many solutions are out there? Right before the COVID lockdown, I was out at RSA, and I walked around and just in somewhat of a marvel at how many solutions all pledge to be the solution that will solve all of your problems. And everybody thinks that. But because of all of these products, we can actually find ourselves with too many products. So it's important to get to a place where we are right-sized, not necessarily, buying into the next good new thing. So in that security market environment, we have this cycle. We have the role that security plays. As we see in a connected world and we see exponential data growth, cloud economics, landscape creating more complexity, business risk, tying all back together, a cyclical process. So what we did, and really through Intel, and Intel has done a great job with this, they've approached everything as, how do I encrypt everything? How do I do workload and data isolation? How do I help build a chain of trust and then integrate that with HPE in creating a secure computing platform? Because as I said, the data exists in three states: at rest, in flight, and in use. But the second prong of data security is also, how do I secure the platform? Is the platform trustworthy? Is the data coming off of that platform resilient? And do I have visibility and control of the platform and the data? And can I do all of those things without compromising the performance of the server? These are the crucial aspects that we've been approaching. So, but based on that, we started having a conversation about how do we get a hardware-based security model? Most security products sit at the apps level, the OS, and the VM, but they don't do a whole lot to protect at the hypervisor level, at the BIOS and the firmware and the CPU. So based on that, we at HP are unique in one way in particular, and this is one differentiator. We create our own silicon, our own BMC, which allows us to, when we create a server, I can create a fingerprint of the CPU and then store that fingerprint inside of my own silicon and then create a chain of trust all the way up the boot stack into the application layer. And that's what we've done. So with that custom HPE chip, which is the ILO chip, we can validate every stage of the boot process through the firmware, through the BIOS, and into the operating system. We can also do the CPLD, the option ROMs. All of those are validated while the server is booting. But we need to have a understanding that it's not just about when the server is booting. We do have one of our competitors that has a process to validate this stuff while it's booting, but they don't validate it while the server is running. I, as an ethical hacker, want to be able to deploy ransomware or deploy an attack without our server reboot. So we have to make sure that not only are we doing this while the server is running, but we are also doing, or while the server is booting, but we also do it while it's running. And through our ILO Advanced, we can actually look at the server while it's running, validate all of those stages of the process, And then based upon if we detect something malicious, we can actually reboot your server to the last known good, or we can boot it to the baseline, or even freeze the server if that's what you need. So through that, HP has created what has been deemed the world's most secure industry standard server. Now, we didn't want that to be just a marketing term. We wanted to be able to validate that with data outside of our control. So we took our Gen 10 server, our Silicon Root of Trust, out to a third party and had them pen test our server and compare it against Dell, Cisco, and Lenovo. Based upon their evaluation in 2017, they stated that we are 2 generations ahead of any server on the market. So if anyone tries to tell you that a server is a server, they're not telling you the truth. There are differentiations in the server market, and our server is more secure than any other server out there. In addition, we have a new validation being done right now, so that by the end of 2020, we hope to be able to continue to say that our server is generations ahead of any server out there. So, so bear with us. We have some examples of that white paper. If that's something you want, you can contact your HPE contact so we can get you a copy of that. But in addition, what we did was we bought Aruba. So when you're talking now about, and this is part of the containerization, we have Aruba and Aruba's ClearPass product that can actually validate products across the environment, both the hardware and the software. So using their policy enforcement firewall and using the Aruba ESP, which is their edge security product, we can actually validate that no changes have been made to any software or hardware on that server. And if it was, we also make sure that that server and that hardware and software are performing the way they should perform. So in addition, what we've done, so we have a thing called Esperal. Now, Esperal is a brand new product that we've come out with in June, and it is all designed around the idea of providing security all the way to the container. So the question on container security, how do we secure containers and audit security on them? That is going to be something built into our Esperal software. So when you want to help deploy more containerization, we can help plug in through the Esperal software. In addition, what we've done is that we formed a partnership with a company called Pensono. So Pensono is a company founded by John Chambers, former CEO of Cisco. Let's see, blockchain and cybersecurity, I'll get to that one. And so what they did was they realized that as our data pushes closer to the edge, we have to also be able to push our servers closer to the edge. So we're going to see more and more servers deployed outside of data centers. And that's why one of the products we offer is called EdgeLine, which is a server that's designed to be outside of a normal data center so that it has different temperature controls, different ruggedization. So if you wanted to put it like in a car or put it on a ship, it would be able to handle those kind of bumps and jolts better. But as we deploy those products closer to the edge, how do I secure it? And right now, the way we secure it is we end up with another firewall. We end up with a firewall at the edge, or we end up with some sort of Zscaler product, or we end up with some sort of SD-WAN product. But what if we could take all of those functionalities and put them inside of a PCIe card that would then be deployed inside of a secure server? And that's the beauty of Pensono. So Pensono has they will have, by the time this server is completely, or the software is completely deployed, they will have a PCIe card with complete stateful firewall capabilities, TLS encryption, workload management, external telemetry to be fed into whatever product you want, all at a very low cost point of under $1,000 per card. What's cool about this, these are being deployed right now. As of June 1st, HPE is deploying the Pensono card inside some of its servers. And so if you're interested in talking about security at the edge and the future of this edge security, talk to us about this, because we really do believe that the Pensono messaging is going to be something that's going to resonate very, very well over time. In addition, we also recognize that cyber insurance is a big part of corporate environments. So in corporate environments, how do I validate whether I'm protected more or less? So what we did is we went to a company called Marsh, which is a cyber insurance company out in New York, and they were developing a program called Cyber Catalyst. And what that program was designed to do was to do an evaluation of hardware and software in the cybersecurity space and security in general, and then recognize whether some of those products actually had a meaningful impact on cyber risk. So in 2019, 150 products were sent to Marsh for evaluation, and they came back with 17 that they designated as being a cyber catalyst product, which reduces cyber risk. We were very happy to note that our Silicon Root of Trust, which is built into all of our Gen 10, Gen 10 Plus servers, was the only hardware product that was recognized in that way. In addition, as an added bonus, the Aruba Policy Enforcement Firewall, which is central to the ClearPass Zero Trust model, was also recognized. So we have 2 products that sit in this particular space. What that means is that if you deploy these products inside of your corporate network in the majority, so you have to have more than 50%, Marsh will provide you positive terms and conditions on your cyber insurance policy, which we believe eventually will map to being, a better terms. So that's our holistic approach to security. We built into all of our products the idea of standards alignment, NIST, compliance enablement, GDPR. We even have new CCPA, right? We have a new privacy law here in the United States that we believe, and I believe from a cybersecurity standpoint, will have more and more followers going forward. There are 25 states right now in the union that are considering passing laws like CCPA. So privacy law is going to become much more built into our security. So when we start talking about compliance and security, if I have a good security model, my compliance model is probably pretty solid. So we want to help you get there. And we want to use our global experience and our best practices to help you. And we believe that the relationship we have with Intel will also help push security further forward and help you get there. I want to thank you for your time. I do want to answer the one question. Somebody asked me about blockchain and cybersecurity. I'm a huge proponent. We actually, inside of HPE, we do have a group of people that do just that. They help companies deploy blockchain into different environments. I think blockchain, I've actually done a lot of conversations about oil and gas and blockchain in the oil and gas environment, and being able to use blockchain to validate data at IoT from an IoT environment. So I'm a big proponent of blockchain, and I think you're going to see more conversations around it. Let's see. So we do have ISO 2700 or 2701 built in as well. I'm not sure where it sits though. I can't probably answer that. I don't know if Jesse could give an answer as to why we chose NIST versus ISO. I think part of it comes from, we have a lot more of our contracts are DoD and US built. So that I think that was probably some of the reason that we did that. Let me stop my share.
Yep, got that here. And then if we want to introduce Jesse to the frame here as well, just for a bit of open Q&A. Hey there, Jesse.
Hey guys.
Lovely to have you. So just to recap to everyone here. So Jesse is the Director of Data Center Security Marketing at Intel. And we do have another question from the audience before I can jump into some of the questions we received actually prior to the session.
The limited budget one, right?
There's a question here. We have a limited budget, but first and foremost, what is your suggestion on how to stop insider threats? That comes from Sandy.
Oh yeah, insider threats. So the first thing on insider threat is establish a program. So a training program on how to recognize the insider threat. In insiders, we always separate into 2 groups, the intentional insider and the unintentional insider. What's kind of interesting about the intentional insider, one of the best things you can do from an insider standpoint is encryption of data at rest. Making sure that the data you have on your file server is actually not available to everybody. That's where also a zero trust environment, having a conversation about making sure that it's not just about what, it's the old security clearance adage. It's not just about whether you have the right to the data, it's do you need to see the data. And so I think when we start looking at zero trust conversations, that there are a lot more opportunities there.
Great. So yeah, Lou Pellicore has a couple questions here. The first one, if you do have limited budget, what are the top 3 investments you would make?
It's a good question. First thing I always tell people is, have you had a security evaluation? Have you had a recent pen test done, third-party pen test? I think that's important to know what your vulnerabilities are. The second thing I would then do is I would really look at things that are outdated and no longer supported. I would focus on those things that I cannot patch anymore. So whether it's, like I said, If you have Windows XP or something weird like that running, get rid of it. You know, the third thing I would do is, you know, and I'd love to say servers, but I would probably look at some sort of behavioral analytic. I think having a behavioral analytic on your system that would actually help you validate, that would help you validate that the people are operating the way they should, goes a long way. Or I would even say, look at a zero trust model. Have a good conversation around deploying a zero trust model that would at least mitigate damages across an environment. I don't know if Jesse, if you had any buy-in on that or thought process on those.
No, I think you hit it. That's good. I think one of the things to think about also is that in addition to vendors like Intel and like HP building lots of security capabilities, as far as making sure that our stuff is secure and delivering that is also tools that are being built in that that customers can take advantage of through various software or solutions. And so keep in mind to look not just do I have a trusted provider with a foundation, which is a great start, but then also what are the add-on technologies and capabilities that I can leverage within my environment to actually protect my data. Use those tools to protect your data up the stack.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a good point. And that's like one of the things that we did. We always say like Gen 10, Silicon Root of Trust is great. We love it. But if you don't have the ILO advanced engine on the top, what one of the guys equated it to is it's like having a Ferrari sitting in your garage with no engine. You have to have visibility into your server. So adding in some of those plugins like that or Infosite is something that we use that helps give us network and data analytics that can help sort of massage the data that you're seeing and make the data more usable at an IT standpoint. So you asked about whether this is desktops or servers. This is all servers. So HPE and HPI separated 5 years ago. So desktops, laptops are all done by HPI, which is the old HP. HPE, we only do servers now. Well, servers and networks. We with the acquisition of Aruba, we have network-based stuff as well. But so this was an evaluation of servers only.
Great. Before I jump into another one of the real-time questions here, I actually want to ask one of the questions that was sent to us prior to this session starting. Might be one for you to kind of handle here, Jesse, actually given your role, but very candid question. How does HPE make the claim that they have the world's most secure industry standard server, and isn't that just marketing?
Well, I think, James obviously spoke to a lot of detail of exactly how they make that claim. I mean, you saw the checklist there, and I don't think Intel's going to take a position on that specifically. But I think what's important is looking for these features, these capabilities. You're right. It's marketing to say the most secure. That's marketing.
Correct.
Go through your checklist and identify the things that you want to protect and that you want to make sure are being provided for you, and then make your selections that way. I think that's the way you take it out of marketing and put it into reality.
And we've even said, test our servers. I mean, that's even a standpoint of if we feel pretty strongly. And I'll be honest, when I was with the FBI when they made that claim back in 2017, and I said, well, you just drew a big old target on your face. Because now every hacker out there is going to try to break your servers. They've not been successful so far. That's one thing that we've seen, and we've got some case points where ransomware wasn't successful against HPE servers, and that's based upon one of the things that's pretty cool about our server is, and I didn't even talk about it, is we validate. I talked briefly about it. We watch to see if there's anything loaded inside of any place in our firmware or hardware that's not approved, that is not fingerprinted. And so when we detect that, and we can do that as much as the default is every 24 hours, but some people have turned it up to every 8 hours, and it checks those servers every 8 hours. And when it detects it, it flags it, and it can automatically reload to your last known good. There's no other server that can do that. That's impressive when you look at it. The other thing is that we've taken, like, for example, and this is some of our, like SimpliVity is a product that we have that has our Silicon Root of Trust built into it, that when it's all your VMs are running, and when you reboot a VM, it can restore a VM, a 1 terabyte VM in less than 60 seconds. So I think when you start looking at it, and yeah, you're going to hear marketing fluff. I'm not going to deny that. Then test it.
Well,
I think
yeah, I think also, keep in mind, security is all about defense in depth, right? There's no single product or single technology that somehow solves all your security needs. It would be silly to suggest that. There are attack vectors that range all over the stack, and therefore there needs to be security capabilities all over the stack. And it really comes down to, you're only as secure as the layer below you. So whether, you can have just the most secure piece of software in the world, but if the OS is vulnerable, then that software is going to be vulnerable. And likewise with the OS, going down to the firmware, and you keep going down that stack, and you got to start with this secure foundation that's all the way down at the hardware silicon level, right? And then but you can't stop there, because then you need to build that chain of trust up that stack. And so, it's important to make sure that you're recognizing that while perimeter security and access-based controls and all of those other things are incredibly important for a secure posture, if you're not starting with secure hardware and a secure platform foundation that you're building on top of, then you're missing an important piece, because attackers are just going to look for the path of least resistance. And so if they hit roadblocks on some of the other layers, then they're just going to move down that layer until they find something that is vulnerable. And that's why you've got to start with that foundation.
Yeah, and so when an attacker gets in your network, they have 3 goals. One is persistence. They want to make sure they can survive a reboot, right? So number 2, move laterally. They want to spread their network as far as they can. And third, they want to escalate privileges. So if they can get a sysadmin login, which is is kind of the golden ticket, they could then load a firmware update into your server just with those sysadmin rights. That's what they want to be able to do. And if your server doesn't have any intelligence to detect a out of cycle or a invalid firmware update, you're never going to know. And we've seen a number of attacks that have gone into the operating system, gone into DLLs and hollowed out DLLs in memory. So that's their goal. They want to get inside RAM, inside and actually hollow out a process, and then dump their malicious process inside of this already running service. And if they can do it without crashing your server, you're never going to know. So that's why, as Jesse said, we're building that silicon root of trust further up the stack all the time. We're always looking at what's the next stage. And we hope to be able to make some announcements, in the next few months about how far up that stack we can move. So that's our goal. That's with working with, Intel on, not just current processors, but even future processors. Because as they add new technologies into those future processors, we want to integrate our silicon root of trust in with those processor capabilities and make an even tighter product. And I think that's why we've had a pretty good relationship with them.
Brilliant. All right, guys. Well, that actually brings us to the end of proceedings. So a fantastic way to end on the fantastic relationship that you guys have formed between HP and Intel. And thank you so much, James, for the presentation, and Jesse for your support on the Q&A as well. A lot of insight on something that, again, continues to be very pertinent for a lot of mid-market organizations. And so for all of you attendees, if you do have further questions for James, Jesse, or the HP or Intel crew, find your reps, reach out to them on LinkedIn. They'll be more than happy to help. And for those folks, obviously, who took the time to obviously participate and view the session today, thank you very much. Give a virtual round of applause to Jesse and James. Thank you both.